So some different tools. There's a lot of those out there. A lot of them are based around the network performance, network monitoring, analyzing. Wireshark's a common one to use. So Joe mentioned it with the sysadmin. It's a great way to see, I'll say packets, but basically the information that's going across your network. So it's a good way to look at that information. See, is it something bad? Is it, coming from a bad, IP address? Again, don't worry about the terminology that we're using in this intro course. But is it a bad IP address? Is there something wrong with the packet or the information? Are we giving away information, right? So are we seeing that when we look at some information, are we seeing that usernames and passwords are sitting right there for if somebody's watching this, they can look at that information and then get my username and password? So all these things are part of a network engineer's job of, not just monitoring the network, but also protecting it. Many different commands that are commonly used are tracert in Windows or traceroute in Linux systems. The ping command is a huge one, nslookup, ipconfig, or ifconfig if you're using Linux, and then also netstat as well. We also want to test our network bandwidth, right? So we can do that. There's different monitoring tools out there, but we can also just do it through different websites like speedtest.net or as many others. And you may be familiar at your home network, like, from your cable company or something, that there's a website when you call them for support, or you call that sysadmin for support, they can kind of talk you through how to go to a certain website. They'll have you check the speed of your connection, and then from there they can help troubleshoot a little more. So that's essentially what we would be doing with a site like Speedtest. We want to see the bandwidth or the, think of it like your car, like how fast your car is going, right? So think of your speedometer. So if we've got a really fast car, like a Lamborghini, Ferrari, or something like that, we can do a lot. We can go to things a lot faster, right? So we can go to the internet a lot faster. Now, if we're driving like a little putt-putt car, that's really beat up and everything like that, it probably can't go that fast, right? It's leaking oil and stuff like that. So that's kind of the same, kind of like what a speed test is, right? So we're essentially hoping that we have that Ferrari or Lamborghini, but we also want to make sure that our network is not that little beat up, junk car that we used to drive like in high school.
I have both metaphorically and literally driven that car many times.
Same here. As many of. IP calculator is another thing that more advanced network engineers use just to make sure they're getting the appropriate IP address. puTTY is good for like SSH connections and telnet connections to make those a little more secure. And then, as I mentioned, there's a whole lot of different network performance and analyzer tools. A lot of SIEMs, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit when we go into incident response in just a moment. A lot of SIEMs will have all this stuff kind of wrapped up into one. So you can monitor your network, you can look at the traffic, you can look, set different alerts on there to report back to you as a network engineer of what's actually going on with your network. Typical day. So I mentioned, reviewing logs, right? That's a huge part, and I can't say it enough. But that's why we have those different, devices, right? That they can take all that information in that we're getting on our network, and then basically, based on what we tell it, they can spit back the appropriate information to help us make better decisions about the network, and also allow us to generate reports that we can use to take to like management or whomever to kind of petition our case. Rebooting devices, so let's say a server is acting up or something like that. Once you've exhausted your troubleshooting, or you may know from experience, like, hey, I just need to reboot this virtual server real quick, and that should clear everything up. And that's one of the things that you may do. Fixing different issues, so different issues are going to be reported or escalated from the sysadmins and saying, hey, this or that's going on. I think there's an issue with this server or this workstation. These are the things that are going on. Can you take a closer look at this? So a lot of that's going to be fixing issues or troubleshooting. Performing backups, so a lot of times this is automated in organizations, as it should be to some extent. But also you want to make sure that you are monitoring or getting an alert about the backups to make sure they're actually being done. I've actually worked with organizations that thought the backups were going, and then once a ransomware attack occurred, they realized that the last backup was like 6 months ago. So they lost all that data from that attack. So keep that in mind if you're going to work as a network engineer. Backup is kind of the great thing there. So just make sure you back up the information. A good thing as well, just for on your own computer, right? Back up your information to the cloud or to an external device. So that way, if something happens on your computer, then you can actually re-image it or just take that information to a new computer and keep working.
As a brief anecdote on that,
Sure.
On the note of backups, I had the worst professional day of my entire life. The organization I was working for, our primary server went down, and I found out that no one had backed it up in more than a year.
Nice.
So I got to spend the next 17 hours with a forensics toolkit combing through that server trying to get as much data as we could back. So,
yes,
back your stuff up or I will haunt you.
And as Joe mentioned, it's never fun, especially, forensic toolkit sounds like super cool, but it's a lot of work to use that to comb through parts of files and everything.
Bit.
Very, very time consuming, as he mentioned. So yes, back it up. So if you decide to work as a network engineer or even a sysadmin or anything in general, just always scream out, back it up to everybody. People get sick of hearing it, but guess what? They'll remember it and they'll back stuff up. So and they'll actually be like, hey, I'm backing it up. Leave me alone. So one thing you guys can try. Access control list, VPNs, another thing, you'll be configuring different VPNs. Also segmenting networks with like VLANs and stuff like that. Again, none of the terminology that you need to know right now, unless you decide that you want network engineering as kind of a career path. And then most importantly on this entire list, besides reviewing logs, documentation. As we kind of talked about with reporting communication, make sure you're documenting everything, generating documentation, as far as mapping out networks, documentation for reporting, so that way you can petition your case in front of management or whomever, and then also so you can stay organized and understand what's actually happening with your network, because a network should be telling you a story. Hopefully it's a good story. It could also be a bad story of like, oh my goodness, we're under attack. But at least it should be telling you some kind of story. And so you need to be mindful of how you can get that information and learn the story of your normal, quote unquote, normal network activity, so that way you can look for abnormal things that are occurring.